The stagecoach door swung open, and Martha Hayes stepped down into a world made of dust. It coated her tongue, tasting of rust and grit, a bitter welcome to Redemption Flats. She was 3,000 miles from Boston, a lifetime away from everything she'd ever known. Her only companions were a worn leather bag and a flicker of hope that was already dying in the oppressive Montana heat. The town, if you could call it that, was a single, sorry-looking street. A dozen buildings, cobbled together from raw timber, leaned against each other like tired old men. It looked like one good gust of wind could send the whole place tumbling down. Martha clutched her bag, the worn handle a flimsy anchor in this desolate new reality. This was her fresh start. This was the place her new life was supposed to begin. But what Martha didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that her new life was already tangled up with death. Just 2 miles away, hidden by a low ridge, a man was methodically cleaning his rifle. His name was Raven, and his hands were rock steady. They didn't shake, not even a little. They hadn't shaken that morning when he'd used that same rifle to put 3 men in the ground. Their bodies were already decomposing in shallow graves behind a barn, tucked away where no one would ever think to look. And in less than an hour, Martha Hayes would be standing on his porch. She'd knock on his door, a polite little rap, and ask for a man named Samuel Brennan, the very same man whose cooling corpse was buried in one of those graves. Raven wasn't planning on telling her that, of course. Not right away. He was going to have a little fun first. Martha was the kind of woman who was born to be invisible. At 32, she had a face you'd forget the second she turned her back. Plain brown hair, pulled back so tight it made her temples ache. A gray dress that had surrendered to fate long ago, clean but patched with careful tiny stitches. She'd learned early on that being forgettable was a form of armor, especially for a woman walking through the world alone. For 14 years, ever since she was a girl of 18, her world had been the 4 walls of a boarding house kitchen in Boston. 14 years of the same sun rising on the same grease-stained pots. Wake before dawn. Cook for 20 hungry mouths. Scrub. Cook again. Scrub again. Then collapse into a cot in an attic room so small she could touch both walls at once. It wasn't a life. It was a routine of survival. The other girls in the boarding house came and went. They married men they didn't love for a scrap of security, or took jobs in the factories that stole the light from their eyes. Martha had started to believe that was all life had to offer. You didn't live it, you just endured it. Then, 6 weeks ago, a discarded newspaper on the kitchen table changed everything. An advertisement, tucked away in the back pages. Cook wanted for Frontier Ranch. Room and board provided, good wages for the right woman. Must be unmarried and willing to relocate. Apply to Samuel Brennan, Redemption Flats, Montana territory. Montana. The word itself sounded like freedom. A place with skies so big they could swallow your past whole. She wrote a letter that very night, her hand trembling by the light of a single candle. She kept it simple. She was a hard worker. She didn't cause trouble. She was 32, unmarried, with no family to tie her down. Samuel Brennan's reply came 3 weeks later. The letter was formal but carried a surprising warmth. He was a widower, he wrote, running his cattle ranch alone. He needed someone to cook for him and a few ranch hands. The work would be hard, he warned, but it would be honest. He promised fair wages, her own room, and respectful treatment. The next day, she gave her notice. She spent every last cent she had on a train ticket west, and then a stagecoach ticket for the final leg of the journey. She packed her entire life into one small bag. 3 dresses, a hairbrush, and a small Bible her mother had given her. That was it. The sum of her existence. Now, standing in the dust of Redemption Flats, that existence felt terrifyingly small. The stagecoach driver pointed a lazy finger north. Brennan Ranch is 2 miles that way. Follow the road, take the right fork. Can't miss it. Then he cracked his whip, and the stagecoach rattled away, leaving her utterly alone. The walk was grueling. The sun beat down like a blacksmith's hammer, and sweat pasted her dress to her skin. The town vanished behind her, replaced by an endless expanse of scrubland and a sky that went on forever. It made her feel like a tiny, exposed bug crawling across a giant's floor. Then she saw it. A ranch house, once white, but now faded to a dusty gray, with a large red barn standing watch behind it. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was home. Her heart gave a nervous flutter. This was it. The first day of the rest of her life. She walked up the porch steps, her legs feeling like jelly. The silence was deafening. No cattle lowing, no men shouting, just the whisper of the wind through dry grass. She raised a shaky hand and knocked. 1 second passed. Then 10. Then a full minute. She was about to knock again, when the door creaked open. The man who stood there was not the kind-faced widower she had imagined. He was a giant, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his shirt and arms thick with muscle. His hair was dark and shaggy, his face covered in several days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath in her throat. They were gray, as cold and empty as a winter sky, and they were looking at her, not with curiosity, but with a flat, chilling calculation, like a butcher sizing up a side of beef. "Can I help you?" His voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth. Martha found her own voice, small and thin. "I'm looking for Samuel Brennan. I'm Martha Hayes. He hired me to be his cook." The man stared at her for a long, unnerving moment. A flicker of something, amusement maybe, danced in those cold eyes. Then he spoke 2 words that sent the world tilting on its axis. "He's dead." Martha's bag slipped from her fingers, hitting the porch with a dull thud. "What?" "No. That's impossible. He wrote to me. He told me to come." Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and panic. He couldn't be dead. He just couldn't. The man leaned against the doorframe, crossing his powerful arms. "Samuel Brennan died 2 weeks ago. Heart gave out. Found him in the barn myself." The words were delivered without a shred of emotion. "Sorry you came all this way for nothing. 2 weeks. He'd died while she was on a train, rattling across the country, dreaming of her new life. A life that had just evaporated into the dry Montana air. Who are you?" she stammered. "Name's Raven," he said. "I own the next ranch over. Been keeping an eye on things here since Brennan passed." Her mind raced, frantically searching for an escape hatch, a solution, anything. She had $3 to her name. Not enough to get back to Boston. Not enough to even get to the next town. There was nothing for her here. But there was nothing for her back there either. I don't know what to do," she whispered, hating the weakness in her own voice. Raven watched her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought he might just close the door in her face, leave her standing there on the porch. Instead, he said something that should have sounded like a lifeline, but felt like a noose tightening around her neck. "Well now," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, a smile that didn't come anywhere near his eyes. "Maybe we can work something out. I could use a cook myself. Same deal Brennan offered you. Maybe even better." She looked at him, really looked at him, and a primal alarm bell started screaming in the back of her mind. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. But desperation was a powerful silencer. She had no money, no home, no options. Saying no meant sleeping in the dirt until she starved. She took a deep breath, the dusty air searing her lungs, and spoke the words that would seal her fate. "All right, I'll stay." Raven's smile widened. "Good decision," he said. He stepped back, holding the door open. "Come on inside. Let me show you your new home." Martha picked up her bag and stepped over the threshold, out of the glaring sun and into the cool, dark house. She didn't know that she was walking into a killer's carefully constructed trap. She didn't know that the man whose heart had supposedly given out had actually been murdered by the very man now closing the door behind her. She didn't know that just beyond the house, hidden behind the barn, the earth was still fresh on 4 unmarked graves. She only heard the soft, final click of the latch as the door swung shut. It was a sound that, had she been listening closely, sounded exactly like a cage snapping closed. The house was cool and smelled faintly of dust and old wood. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Martha saw that the main room was tidy, almost too tidy. A table and chairs stood perfectly arranged. Books on a shelf were aligned with military precision. It didn't look lived in. It looked staged, like a room in a museum no one was allowed to touch. "Kitchen's through there," Raven said, his voice echoing slightly in the stillness. "You can have the small bedroom down the hall." He moved past her, his large frame seeming to suck all the air out of the room. He paused in the kitchen doorway. "You look like you could use some water." She followed him, her throat so dry it felt like it was lined with sandpaper. The kitchen was well stocked, and he worked the pump until cool, clear water gushed into a tin cup. He handed it to her, and she drank it down so fast she nearly choked. He watched her, that same unnerving, calculating look in his eyes. He refilled the cup without her asking. "Slow down," he said. "Don't want you getting sick." As she sipped the second cup, he leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, a holster with a large revolver strapped to his hip. "So, you really came all this way from Boston alone?" "I did," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "I saw Mr. Brennan's advertisement. It seemed like a chance for something different." "Something different," he repeated, the words rolling off his tongue like he found them amusing. "Well, you certainly got that." He stared out the window for a moment. Brennan was a good man. Quiet. Kept to himself. His ranch hands left right after he died. Didn't want to stay on without a boss to pay him. Something about that pricked at her. All of them left? How many were there? Raven's eyes narrowed for just a fraction of a second. It was so fast, she almost missed it. 3 of them. Rode out together the day after the funeral. Headed south, I reckon. He pushed off the counter and moved closer, and Martha had to fight the urge to take a step back. "Now, about my offer," he continued, his voice dropping a little. "You can stay here. This house is better set up than mine. You cook for me, I'll pay you the same wage Brennan promised. $20 a month." More than Brennan had offered. Why would he offer more? It didn't make sense. But then, nothing did. She was in a dead man's house, being offered a job by a stranger who made her skin crawl. But what choice did she have? "And you'd be safe here," he added, his voice like silk wrapping around steel. "A woman alone out here. She needs protection. I'll make sure nobody bothers you." The way he said it wasn't a promise. It was a claim of ownership. She swallowed the lump of fear in her throat. "All right," she said. "I'll do it." "Good," he said, his smile returning. "Breakfast at dawn." He walked to the door, then turned back, his hand on the knob. "Oh, and Martha, I'd stay close to the house if I were you. Rattlesnakes around here are nasty, and there are other dangers. Best not to go wandering." It wasn't advice. It was a command. Then he was gone, the door closing with a solid thud. Martha rushed to the window and watched him mount his horse and ride off toward the ridge, a dark silhouette against a blood-red sunset. Only when he was gone from sight did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She told herself she was being foolish. He was just a rough frontier man. She was alone and spooked. That's all it was. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a terrible, terrible mistake. She explored the house, her new prison. In the larger bedroom, which must have been Brennan's, the bed was rumpled. A pair of muddy boots sat on the floor, too small for a man of Raven's size. On the nightstand was a photograph of a kind-faced, middle-aged man and a woman, Samuel Brennan and his wife. He looked tired but decent, and now he was dead. She moved to the smaller room that was to be hers. It was simple, with a narrow bed and a small dresser. As she unpacked her meager belongings, she glanced out the window toward the barn. The big red door was slightly ajar, a dark, yawning mouth. Raven had said he'd found Brennan in there. A cold dread washed over her. She forced the thought away and went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. The familiar act of cooking calmed her nerves slightly. She found potatoes, onions, and salt pork. Soon, the The simple meal was ready. She set the table for two and waited, her anxiety growing with each passing shadow in the yard. He arrived just after dusk, coming inside without knocking. He ate like a starving animal, shoveling food into his mouth without a word. The silence was thick with unspoken things. "You cook good," he finally said, leaning back in his chair. "So, no family back in Boston? No husband waiting for you?" "No," she said quietly. "My parents are gone. I was never married." "Nobody knows you're here then," he said, his voice soft, contemplative. "Nobody expecting letters?" The question hung in the air, cold and sharp as a knife. A lie, quick and desperate, sprang to her lips. "The landlady at my boarding house knows. She knows I came to work for Mr. Brennan in Montana." Raven nodded slowly, his eyes boring into hers. "Good. It's good to have someone who knows where you are." He stood up, and she flinched. He noticed. A flicker of satisfaction crossed his face. "I'll be back for breakfast. At dawn." He paused at the door. "Martha, you should probably push that dresser in your room up against the door tonight. Just to be safe. Never know what kind of animals are wandering around out here in the dark." He left. Martha stood frozen, his words echoing in the silent room. Animals. Was he warning her about coyotes, or was he warning her about himself? She cleaned the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped a plate. In her room, she did as he'd suggested, shoving the heavy dresser against the door until it was wedged tight. She lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring into the darkness, listening. Every creak of the old house, every howl of a distant coyote, sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Sleep was a distant country she couldn't reach. Sometime in the dead of night, she finally drifted off, only to dream of cold gray eyes watching her from the shadows, and the sound of a trap snapping shut. The first thing she saw when she woke was the wall across from her bed, and what was hanging there sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her system, chasing away the last remnants of sleep. 3 gun belts. They hadn't been there last night. Or if they had, she'd missed them in the dark. But in the pale gray light of dawn, they were impossible to miss. 3 worn leather belts, 3 empty holsters. And carved into the leather of each one were a set of initials. JMTRDK Raven had said there were 3 ranch hands. He said they had ridden south. But no man on the frontier, no ranch hand, would ever leave his gun behind. It was his life, his protection, his livelihood. You'd sooner leave your own arm, unless you weren't able to take it with you, unless you left in a hurry, unless you were dead. Her blood ran cold. He hadn't just put the belts there. He had hung them there, like trophies, like a warning. She quietly moved the dresser and crept into the kitchen, her mind racing. She had to act normal. She had to pretend she hadn't seen a thing. She was making coffee when she heard his horse. He came in, a shadow in the doorway, that same dead smile on his face. "Morning. Something smells good." He ate his breakfast while she pretended to be busy, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Yes, thank you," she lied, her voice miraculously steady. "Good," he said, wiping his mouth. "I'll be gone most of the day, working the north pasture." The moment his horse was a speck on the horizon, Martha moved. She had hours. She had to find proof. She started in Brennan's room. In his bedside table, beneath a stack of old almanacs, she found a bundle of letters. They were addressed to Samuel Brennan. The postmarks were from the last 3 weeks, letters that had arrived after the day Raven claimed Brennan had died. Why wouldn't Raven just throw them away? Unless he wanted it to seem like Brennan had been alive to receive them. He wasn't just covering his tracks. He was building a new story. A false timeline. She went outside, the sun already hot on her neck. She forced her feet to carry her toward the barn, toward the place she didn't want to go. The air inside was thick and still, smelling of hay and old leather and something else. Something coppery and metallic. Blood. Near the back wall, in the dirt floor, she saw them. Dark stains. Someone had tried to scrub them away, to turn the earth over, but you couldn't erase that much blood. Not completely. Her stomach heaved. This wasn't where a man had a heart attack. This was a slaughterhouse. She stumbled back outside, gasping for air, and circled around behind the barn. And that's when she saw it. The thing that confirmed every nightmare that had been swirling in her head. 4 patches of disturbed earth. The soil was darker, freshly turned. 4 long, rectangular mounds, crudely disguised with scattered hay. The size and shape were unmistakable. They were graves. 1 for Samuel Brennan, and 3 more for J.M., T.R., and D.K. The men whose gun belts now hung on her bedroom wall. Raven hadn't found Brennan dead. He had killed him. He had killed them all. And she was his next victim, living on borrowed time, cooking meals for her own executioner. Panic seized her. She should run. Just run. Flee across the open plains and never look back. But her legs were rooted to the spot. Run where? He'd catch her on his horse before she'd gone a mile. Even if she made it to town, who would believe her? A strange woman with a wild story about a respected local rancher? They'd think she was mad. No. She couldn't run. Not yet. She had to play his game. She had to be the meek, obedient cook. She had to smile and serve him his dinner while she plotted. She had to survive. She walked back to the house, a cold, hard resolve solidifying in her chest. She sat on her bed and stared at the gun belts. They weren't just trophies. They were a message meant for her. This is what I do. This is who I am. Stay useful, or you'll join them. For the next 2 weeks, Martha lived a lie. She cooked and cleaned and tended the small garden, her face a mask of placid obedience. Inside, she was a coiled spring of terror and rage. Every day was a performance. Every meal was a test. Raven seemed to enjoy it. He started staying later, drinking whiskey by the fire, telling her stories. Stories that were not just stories. They were confessions, veiled in hypotheticals. "Had a fella work for me once," he said one night, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Got greedy. Thought he could take what was mine. Had to teach him a lesson." He looked at her, his eyes glinting in the firelight. He disappeared. Funny how people can just vanish out here. He was telling her what happened to Brennan's men. He was telling her what would happen to her if she stepped out of line. One afternoon, hiding in the pantry, she overheard him talking to himself as he saddled his horse. "That deputy is coming through next week. Gotta make sure everything's buttoned up. Keep the cook quiet." A deputy. A lawman. It was a sliver of hope, a chance. If she could just get a message to him, if she could just find a way to speak to him alone. That night, she tested the waters. "I'm running low on flour," she said, her voice casual. "I was thinking I could ride into town with you sometime." Raven's eyes went flat. "No need for that. You make me a list. I'll get what you need." He paused. "There's nothing for you in town, Martha." The message was clear. She was a prisoner. The walls were closing in. The deputy was coming, but how could she reach him? Raven would never leave them alone together. She started making her own preparations. She stole a small, sharp paring knife from the kitchen and hid it under her mattress. She began sneaking scraps of food, dried meat, biscuits, and hiding them in a loose stone in the chicken coop, a place Raven never went. If she had to make a run for it, she wouldn't go empty-handed. He noticed the change in her. He must have seen the new resolve in her eyes, the way she no longer flinched when he stood too close. One evening, he backed her against the kitchen wall, his sheer size trapping her. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical force. "You've been thinking a lot lately, Martha," he said, his voice a low growl. "I can see the wheels turning in that pretty little head of yours. Don't get any stupid ideas. We have a good arrangement here. I'd hate for you to spoil it." He reached out and gently tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so terrifyingly intimate it almost made her scream. That night, she heard a new sound outside her window. A soft, rhythmic scraping. It went on for nearly an hour. In the morning, she looked out and saw it. He had spent the night embedding shards of broken glass into the top of the fence surrounding the small yard. He was building her cage, piece by piece, A few days later, she was kneading bread when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Not one, but two. Her heart leaped into her throat. She looked out the window and saw Raven riding up with another man. This was it. This had to be the deputy. But the man wasn't wearing a badge. He was an older rancher, his face weathered and kind. Raven brought him inside. "Martha, this is Frank Wilson. Owns the next spread over. Frank, this is my new cook, Martha." Frank Wilson tipped his hat. "Pleasure, ma'am. I was sorry to hear about Samuel." His eyes were sharp, and they lingered on her for a moment too long. He saw something. He saw the fear she was trying so desperately to hide. This was her chance. She could scream. She could beg for help. But Raven was standing right there, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. If Frank didn't believe her, if he rode away and left her here, Raven would kill her. Slowly. She had to be smarter. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice even. "It was a terrible tragedy. Mr. Raven has been very accommodating." She saw Raven relax, just a fraction. He thought he had her broken. Frank stayed for coffee, talking cattle prices with Raven, but his gaze kept returning to Martha. As he was leaving, he paused on the porch. "You take care now, ma'am," he said, his eyes conveying a message she couldn't quite decipher. "My place is 10 miles south. If you ever find yourself in need of anything." The moment Frank was gone, Raven turned to her, that predatory smile back on his face. "You did good, Martha. Real good. You're learning." He took a step closer. "But I found something interesting this morning while I was feeding the chickens." Her blood turned to ice. "Found a little bundle of food tucked away," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Now, why would you be hiding food, Martha? Unless you were planning on taking a little trip." He pulled his revolver from its holster and laid it on the kitchen table with a heavy, final thud. "Looks like I was wrong about you. I can't trust you after all." Her mind went white with terror. He was going to kill her, right here, right now. But in that split second, as he reached for her, her body reacted on pure primal instinct. A pot of water was boiling on the stove, ready for the dishes. She grabbed the handle and spun, throwing the scalding contents directly into his face. He screamed, a high, inhuman sound of agony, stumbling back, clawing at his blistering skin. The gun was forgotten on the table. Martha ran. She burst through the door and into the yard, her lungs screaming for air. She heard him behind her, roaring her name, his footsteps pounding the dirt. "You're dead, Martha! You hear me? Dead!" She scrambled toward the barn, not with a plan, but with the desperate instinct of a cornered animal seeking shelter. She burst into the shadows, her eyes darting around for a weapon, anything. A pitchfork leaned against a stall. She grabbed it, the wood rough in her trembling hands. He filled the doorway, a terrifying silhouette. His face was a horrific mask of red, peeling skin, but his eyes were blazing with a pure, murderous hatred. "Nowhere to run!" he snarled, advancing on her. She swung the pitchfork wildly. He caught it easily, wrenching it from her grasp and throwing it aside. He slapped her, a brutal backhand that sent her sprawling into the dirt and hay. She tasted blood. He stood over her, all pretense gone. This was the real Raven. "You want to know what happened to Brennan?" he hissed, kicking her in the ribs. "I shot him in the back. His men came running, and I shot them too. It was easy. Taking this land was easy." He pulled a long knife from his boot. "I was going to keep you. You were useful. But you had to be smart." He grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back, and pressed the cold steel of the knife to her throat. This was it. The end. And then she heard it. A sound that cut through her terror. Hoofbeats. Fast. Coming closer. Raven heard it too. He froze, listening. "Not a sound!" he hissed in her ear, the knife biting into her skin. "Not one damn sound." But Martha was done being quiet. She was done being a victim. She opened her mouth and screamed, a raw, primal sound of defiance and desperation. "Help! In the barn! He's going to kill me!" a man shouted from outside. "Raven! What's going on in there? It was Frank Wilson's voice. He'd come back. Raven cursed, dragging her to her feet, holding her in front of him as a shield. They shuffled out into the blinding sunlight. Frank was there, and with him were two other men. One of them wore a silver star on his chest. The deputy. "Let her go, Raven," Frank said, his rifle leveled. Raven laughed, a crazed, broken sound. "This is my property, Wilson. My cook. Get the hell off my land." "That's Deputy Marshal Reed," the man with the star said, his voice like iron. "And we've been tracking a man matching your description for a string of murders from here to Texas. They call him the Land Baron Killer." "You have no proof!" Raven snarled. Martha found her voice, shouting past the hand clamped over her mouth. "The graves! Behind the barn! 4 of them! And the gun belts! In my room!" The deputy's gun was now aimed squarely at Raven's head. "It's over. Let her go." Raven's eyes darted around, looking for an escape he knew he didn't have. He shoved Martha forward, sending her stumbling to the ground. "You want her? Fine!" As she fell, she saw his other hand dart toward his boot. He was going for another weapon. Time seemed to warp and slow. Her hand closed around a fist-sized rock in the dirt. Raven pulled a tiny derringer from his boot and aimed it at the deputy. With every ounce of strength she had left, Martha threw the rock. It struck his wrist just as he fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dust. In the same instant, the deputy's pistol bucked twice. 2 loud cracks echoed across the prairie. Raven staggered back, 2 dark red flowers blooming on his chest. He looked down at them, an expression of genuine surprise on his ruined face. Then he looked at Martha. He collapsed to his knees, and then pitched forward into the dirt. And was still. It was over. The hours that followed were a blur. The deputy and his men found everything, just as she'd said. The graves. The gun belts. Forged deeds to the ranch in Raven's saddlebags. He was, indeed, the Land Baron Killer. A monster who preyed on isolated ranchers, stealing their lives and their land. "You're the only one who ever got away from him," Deputy Reed told her, his voice full of a grim respect. "You're lucky to be alive." Martha didn't feel lucky. She felt scoured out, empty. But she was alive. In the weeks that followed, the town of Redemption Flats had to decide what to do with Samuel Brennan's ranch. He had no known heirs. At a town meeting, Frank Wilson stood up. "That ranch belongs to the woman who brought its killer to justice," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Samuel would have wanted his home to go to someone with that kind of grit." The town agreed. They offered the deed to Martha Hayes. At first, she wanted to run, to leave the place and its ghosts behind. But she rode out one more time and stood on the porch, looking out at the vast open land. This wasn't a cage anymore. It was a kingdom. A place she hadn't just been given, but a place she had earned with her own survival. She accepted. She hired 2 hands Frank recommended. She learned to ride, to mend fences, to brand cattle. The soft hands of a Boston cook became the calloused, capable hands of a rancher. The fear didn't vanish overnight. For months, she slept with a rifle by her bed, but slowly, the nightmares faded, replaced by the deep, satisfying exhaustion of a hard day's work. 6 months later, she stood on her porch, watching the sun set over her land, her cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. The timid woman who had stepped off that stagecoach was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had looked into the eyes of a monster and had refused to blink. She had come west looking for a job and had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found herself. Here, on the harsh and unforgiving frontier, under that endless sky, Martha Hayes was finally, truly, home. If you were amazed by Martha's courage and think she's one of the toughest survivors we've ever told you about, go ahead and hit that like button. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, so you don't miss the next story of unbelievable survival against all odds.